Welcome everybody to this session on overcoming borders through refugee entrepreneurship. My name's Iain Wilkinson and I lead some of the civic mission work at the University of Kent. I'm delighted today to invite two speakers to this session. We're going to be hearing from Sophie Alkhaled, who's a senior lecturer at Lancaster University who specialises in entrepreneurship and has worked extensively with refugee communities in the Middle East and around Europe as well. And also we have Paul Gurney, who's the CEO and founder of BecomingX. How this event is going to run is with, first of all, some presentations from our speakers. So you'll hear first from Sophie and then from Paul. And then we're going to have a question and answer session. You're welcome to write questions in the chat box to the right of the screen, and we'll pick those up as the session runs. And we'll be here for around an hour. And I look forward to us all having a very productive exchange over this very compelling topic, and at a time when certainly this issue has huge salience in the UK context. So Sophie, if you'd like to come and start your presentation, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's really an absolute pleasure and an honour to be on the opening keynote panel for the British Academy of Management 2025 conference. So thank you so much for inviting me to be here today. So my research, what I'm going to try to talk about in roughly about 10 minutes is my research with refugee communities who are engaging in entrepreneurship as a means of survival, probably for over the last 15 years. So it will be a very sort of whistle-stop tour in a way. To kind of give you a little bit of background, I was doing my PhD on women's entrepreneurship and minority community entrepreneurship, and I was looking at the context of women's entrepreneurship in Saudi Arabia. And then the Arab Spring began in 2011, which was sweeping across the Middle East, and possibly one of the most impacted countries was Syria. Within a very short period of time, the Syrian people had been displaced externally and internally. I believe around 50% were either dead or displaced or detained within the first year or so, which was really unprecedented. And I had a personal interest in it. I'm of Syrian descent. My father's Syrian, my mum's British. But I was also really fascinated when I was reading UNHCR, UN Women and UNICEF documents that were highlighting just how many women had become heads of households for the first time in their lives because so many men had been detained or died during the war. And particularly in neighbouring countries like Iraq and Lebanon and Jordan. So that was so there was sort of two reasons, maybe a personal but also an academic interest in understanding their experiences of becoming entrepreneurs and how they were engaging in it under such extreme conditions. Of course, from an academic perspective, I came up against a number of difficulties. How do we engage with theory when so much of it is conducted in the West, usually on Western populations? How do we do it methodologically in a way that is ethical, but also considers people being displaced multiple times, not just once? And what does it mean for our policy and the research impact? So that's kind of what I'll try and take you through now during this presentation. So obviously this isn't just a Syrian crisis. Today there are over 100 million people that are forcibly displaced around the world, around 35 million externally displaced outside of their homelands, with an estimated of 1.2 billion climate refugees by 2050. And part of the narratives that the UNHCR are trying to spread around the world is to support refugees in building self-reliance through entrepreneurship. So to kind of move away from this narrative of being a burdensome refugee and being more of an innovative, creative entrepreneur. And the OECD is obviously pushing forward for policies as well for more inclusive entrepreneurship, especially where we find that 75% of women, 75% of the missing entrepreneurs category, or the entrepreneurs that we know very little about, are women. So in terms of looking at it from a theoretical perspective, I started from all the usual points of looking at mixed embeddedness, necessity entrepreneurship, looking at different theories in migration studies, and really struggled to be able to find a theoretical lens and perspective to help us understand their experiences. But my struggle wasn't new. We've been talking about this in critical entrepreneurship studies for at least a couple of decades, if not more. That very much the research is Western, very white, very individualistic, this heroic white male who's socially embedded within this web of socioeconomic opportunities. And when we take that perspective and try and understand the experience of a refugee mother who has children and is moving to a foreign country by force and probably has lost vast majority of her family, these perspectives are really not helpful for us to understand their experiences. But there has been great movement, so taking intersectional perspectives, post-colonial feminine perspectives, but to try and take into account the micro and macro politics of location and context, but we're still very much in early stages of really trying to put this into action and to really develop more impactful work. This was something that I tried to do in a paper that I published with my co-author in Organisation Studies. So, very much the journey began looking at how Syrian women refugees in Jordan were engaging in entrepreneurship as a means of economic survival. But as we delved into the data and looked at it from different perspectives, we found it was very much also about a journey of cultural revival and building a sense of belonging and continuity during liminality while living in this limbo state of how long am I going to be here versus when am I going to be able to go home. And the study, we looked at women in Jordan, women who are in the Zaatari refugee camp on the Jordanian-Syrian border, and women in the UK as well. In terms of methodological approaches, in an absolute nutshell, the history of studying entrepreneurship very much started off as a very gender blind methodology. Over time, gender was seen as a variable, so they basically just kind of plonked women in there as a variable within the mostly quantitative data that was being collected. And of course, that didn't help us learn a lot about women's experiences. And over time, we're starting to look at gender as a social construction and really taking in exciting multimodal approaches, thinking about reflexivity and ethical considerations, and trying to move away from the kind of West is best and colonizing perspectives that we use to understand their experiences. So this was also a paper that I worked on with a group of fantastic colleagues. We were looking at, well, how do we collect data, qualitative research in particular, in countries that are non-Western. So we had examples from what I was looking at in Jordan, but also looking at China and looking at Japan and also looking at South Africa. And one of the issues that I was particularly focusing on within this paper was really understanding the ethical protocol and confidentiality forms that we fill out again in Western institutions in the UK. How do we take that and translate that when we're collecting data from the most vulnerable people in the world who might not be aware of the way that we conduct research? And finally, we need to really think about and consider, how do we evaluate the impact of refugee entrepreneurship? So again, going back to what I was originally talking about, is that we're still very much battling the burdensome refugee narrative. And because we've been unable to accurately collect the data that shows the true impact of refugee entrepreneurship that it has on local communities. And again, most of that is collected in a very gender neutral manner as well. So when we, by doing that, we're kind of using there's this methodological oversight that's taking place, and it's always portraying women as weaker entrepreneurs because we're always measuring it from an economic perspective or a numbers perspective. But in reality, some research is starting to come through now to show that if we do support women's entrepreneurship, then we find that there's a drop in numbers in, for example, child marriage, particularly young girls getting married, and also an increase of well-being within the household. So by no means am I saying supporting entrepreneurship is the holy grail and be all and end all, and that's going to solve all our problems, and we can talk about that in more depth later. But there's definitely some positives that are coming out of it if we just were able to collect the data accurately to portray how impactful it can be, and empowering for the refugees themselves. And that's something that we need to work on in terms of future research. And finally, this is a paper that we've just published where we're kind of trying to translate our research on refugees, and we're trying to convert the maybe more academic theory aspects into more practice and policy suggestions. And this was a paper that we worked on. We were looking actually at Ukrainian refugees and who'd gone to the Netherlands. And within the paper, we tried to develop a diagnostic tool and framework so that academics can take it and use it to be able to support organizations, social enterprises, or government initiatives as well, to be able to support refugee integration, foster the sense of belonging, especially during periods of uncertainty, which is quite prolonged. Again, originally we brought in this concept of indeterminate liminality, where you're constantly living in limbo. You're imagining, or you're told you're going to get out of it at some point, but it seems to be never ending. And it's just a case of trying to be able to to find the right tools to research these communities theoretically, methodologically, and then to be able to convert it in a way for us to be able to develop impactful research and policy for our local governments and organisations as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie, and please be thinking of questions because we'll be returning in a while for the question and answer session. I'm going to now ask Paul to take the stage. And as I've mentioned already, he's the CEO and founder of BecomingX. It was quite useful that Sophie's presentation ended on a more with a focus more on practicalities, because certainly Paul's interest has been in enabling and helping people to realise their potential in this area. So Paul, please do come forward and let's hear more about what you've been doing with BecomingX.
Yeah, thanks so much. Good afternoon. So my name's Paul Gurney. I'm the CEO of BecomingX. We're a social impact company set up to help people realise their potential. So my background has always been on the business side. I was a senior director at Accenture for 15 years and then left with this vision to help people achieve more than they think they can. Now, what does that really mean? Well, set up a company with Bear Grylls, the TV adventurer, all about equipping people with the inspiration, the insight and opportunities to go out and succeed. So what I spend a lot of my time doing is training people at some of the very biggest companies in the world, big four, top consultancies, top tech companies, everything from senior leader training on helping them be better leaders through to early careers and helping people build those skills to succeed. What's unique about BecomingX is we take the revenue from that and then we support other groups, typically disadvantaged groups, including refugees, to help them realize their potential. So we're what's called a B Corporation, a company set up for social impact, very proudly the highest scoring B Corp in the UK, third highest in the world. And what I want to do now is just tell you a little bit of story of how we got to working with refugees and really make this a human challenge, not just for you in this room, but actually collectively the organizations that you represent, and give you opportunities to actually help and make a difference. So when the war started, and sadly there's a few wars, when Russia invaded Ukraine back in 2022, Bear and I sat down and said, look, what can we really do to help? Fundamentally, we're a learning and development company. What can we do to help? Now, here's the reality. We've got millions, and 8 to 9 million people leaving Ukraine in a very short space of time. Regardless of whether people left their homes and became refugees, i.e. leaving the country, or they were internally displaced, almost everybody's lives was changed, particularly young people. Education was hugely disrupted. So we said, right, what can we do to help? We can develop educational content and entrepreneurial content to help Ukrainians thrive in their new circumstances. So we work with some of our biggest corporate partners. We work with Accenture and Amazon to build this platform called BecomingX Ukraine. It's still live now. You can check it out, becomingx.ua. We built this platform that enabled all Ukrainians, whether they are refugees in another country trying to get a job, or whether they are teachers or young people. Part of what we've done is we've worked with the highest performers in the world to try and understand what it really takes to succeed. So back in the UK, we filmed presidents, Nobel Peace Prize winners, Oscar winners, all focused on helping people learn what it really takes to succeed. And that was very much our approach for BecomingX Ukraine. So taking all of our insights into how to get a great job and trying to build that into a platform where people could really take that knowledge and go out and succeed in what they did. So we got to work with many of Ukraine's highest performers, the likes of Vladimir Klitschko, Elena Svitolina, Andrei Shevchenko, really iconic people in Ukraine, as well as people like President Zelensky. So Bear and I did a film with him. It's on Amazon Prime now if you want to watch it, trying to really bring insight into what is happening both in Ukraine, but crucially, trying to create the opportunities for Ukrainians to succeed. Now, in building this platform, I hired 2 Ukrainian refugees into BecomingX. And despite working in this area for like 20 years, I naively thought their situation was going to be a little bit easier than it actually was. So I hired Max. He had been working for about 25 years. So he was about 50. He had been in Ukraine. He was on holiday with his family. The war started, became a refugee overnight. He could never actually get back to Ukraine. And he found himself in the UK with his pregnant wife and his 5 kids. It took him a month to leave Egypt, where he was on holiday. We also hired a young lady called Karina, who's 21, who traveled all across Europe, came to the UK. And at this point, we're about 6 months into their time in the UK. And I hired them, obviously went through an interview process, and bright, smart people, right? Both had university degrees, had a lot of experience. Max, particularly the more senior of the 2. And it just blew my mind because it'd been 6 months of them being in the country, and really simple stuff. Max was still living in a hostel with 22 Ukrainians and his family, all living in one room. And simple stuff. So I said, Max, could you just give me your bank account details, and we'll obviously sort out all of the contracts. So look, I haven't got a bank account yet. What do you mean you don't have a bank account? I said, well, look, I can't get one. We're trying to go into banks, and I've got a temporary address in this hostel. I said, okay, well, look, let me try and help you. Speaking to Karina, the same sort of problems. Okay, living on a sofa, hadn't been able to get a job for 6 months, and really, really simple stuff. And I said to him, look, Max, Karina, there must be a website, an app, or something that can help you. This is the UK, right? We're organised. We've got at the moment 300,000 refugees living in the UK. There's going to be stuff to help you explain it. I said, look, Paul, there really isn't. There must be. Leave it to me. So because of my past background, quite well connected to NGOs. So I pick up the phone, UNHCR, said, hey guys, I've got, here's my situation very practically, got 2 people, I'm just trying to help get set up, everything from bank accounts to accommodation, all of those key things. Well, where's your app? Where can they go? Well, we don't do that. Most of the UNHCR is outside the UK, and it's not really what we do. Okay. Called up a mate of mine at the British Red Cross and said, look, hey, where's your app? Like, where can these people get the information to just sort themselves out? We don't do that either. We've got a few refugee sites they can pop into around the UK. anyway, cut long story short, we tried several other refugee organisations who are, in most cases, they've got millions of pounds of funding to support refugees. And to be clear, they do a good job in supporting, but actually they're missing the most fundamental opportunity, which is about enabling refugees to succeed themselves, giving them the information they need and the service and support in a way that's easily understandable to help them go and thrive. And this didn't exist, and it doesn't exist, and it absolutely blew my mind. Someone with a background in corporate strategy, sustainability work in corporates, I'm not exaggerating, it was 10 minutes of strategy work to come up with a concept for an app called Beacon, which is something that BecomingX has been working on now with NGO partners, with corporate partners, to help refugees build those skills to succeed. So you'll see this on screen now, which just gives you an overview. We are part way through building this at the moment. This is Strategy 101 and a solution that the world desperately needs. It's essentially an app free to use for every refugee that gives them the information they need to know to get set up in the country. Everything from, the fundamentals of how to get a bank account. And guess what? We worked with our partner Wise. You can now get a bank account as a refugee in 15 minutes. Before this, it took 6 months. You need address, you need various security clearance, you need various documents. Well, we've worked to change that. Accommodation, how can you actually search for accommodation that's available? What does that look like? A huge amount of information that we've provided. Secondly, it provides the services and support. There's over 100 NGOs providing services and support to refugees. Basic stuff. How do you know about that as a refugee? If you come in from Ukraine or Syria or Afghanistan, which represents 60% of refugees globally, how would you know? Where would you even know where to search? So actually, that's a really simple problem. We work with refugee centres that actually have to advertise. They spend a lot of money posting leaflets through to hotels saying, look, we're here to support. But actually, how do you make all those services easily available to people? Now, many of you are probably thinking, hey, Paul, well, this is all very good, but how many refugees have phones? Well, actually, the answer to that is 93%. Certainly in more developed countries. And now for the first time in history, in 2022, we tipped the scales now. We have more refugees in higher income countries than we do lower and middle income countries. And why? A lot of that was really that shift from Ukraine. So actually, refugees now, by and large, do have access to smartphones. And even back in 2016, my former employer, Accenture, did a study looking at this in Africa. Right. And actually, amazingly, it's one of the most valued possessions. So even then, 2016, it was over 50% of people had access to phones. Now, way, way higher. So because of that, we've also been working with other refugees, trying to film them to give them real practical advice. So much of what we heard from refugees was, I just get written information. I see it, it's out of date. Well, we're keeping everything up to date and having real human people tell the story. This is tough, this is difficult, but this is what you need to do. And actually making this a really human experience where people can take advice and guidance from others. We match them with mentors. So part of what we do at BecomingX, we take the corporate folk we work with and train, and part of our leadership development programs, we match them with refugees to help them get a job. So right now in the UK, only about 51% of refugees have jobs. And let's take Ukrainians, 94% left Ukraine with a job. Even after a year, only 53% was the last stat I saw are now employed. There's an enormous amount of potential if we can give people the information they need, the support they need to get set up and go on and succeed in the UK and in their host countries. And that's the opportunity we've got together. I don't think it needs a huge amount of study. Be honest, this is not complex stuff. What it needs is real action. It needs investment in the right areas. And with that, we can make a massive difference to changing people's lives. Iain, back to you.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Sophie. Please just to remind you, if you have questions for speakers, to add them to the chat box, and we'll be moving on to those in due course. We've had two quite different presentations. We've had Sophie sort of plot out an academic field for us, which I think speaks to some of the power relationships which exist within the academy, and also reflects upon the sort of the whole status of this as a field of study and concern with it within the academy. And then we have Paul's engagement, or the start of a story. I'm sure we want to develop it more, looking at what he's been doing here. I just wondered whether both of you might outline a little bit more some of the challenges that you see refugee communities facing, and how your work might engage more directly with helping them overcome some of those challenges. I mean, Paul, you began by saying you've been working quite a lot with Ukraine. I was left with lots of questions about how elaborate your work could be. You know, how clearly it sounds like you've got a lot of connections which were Ukraine focused, but when it comes to refugee communities in other contexts, I wonder about the potential to upscale what you're doing in more diverse forms. And Sophie, I was very intrigued by where you ended with your interest in policy and the engagement at that end, and I wonder how when you're corralling all this information and getting it into a communicable form, what you're hoping to do with it more in terms of that application. So if that's, I suppose, two big questions to sort of set you off on. Maybe we can hear from Sophie first, given that Paul's just had a good turn, and give us a little bit more about what you're doing with this data you're gathering.
Yeah, thank you. It's one of the most interesting things that I found when I was doing research with the Syrian refugees in Jordan. It started in 2015, and when they first arrived, there were literally no work permits, and they were receiving somewhere, depending on number of children that they had, etc., they were receiving somewhere between 40 to maybe 100 Jordanian dinars a month, when the rent was 220 dinars a month. So this was when they entered in 2011, 2012. My study started in 2015, but obviously they were reflecting on this period. You don't need to be a mathematician to see that there was no work permits, and they weren't given enough aid to be able to just pay rent and feed their children, etc. So they were sort of forced into entrepreneurship, but also registration was extremely cumbersome. I believe it was, you needed to have a passport, particular papers, a large capital. You needed to find a local Jordanian to invest in you as well. You know, these were just things that were not available, and very much similar to what Paul was talking about. We're talking about people who are left with nothing. So there's this tension between not having enough aid, being seen as burdensome because you're then engaging in illegal work. And when I mean illegal, it's not, sort of, selling drugs or whatever. We're just talking about working without a contract, being paid, being a lot cheaper than a local person. So I guess there was, over the years, there's been a lot of work by many organisations, academics, NGOs, a lot of input from the UNHCR to increase the number of work permits, to make the red tape a lot easier for people to be able to set up their own businesses, particularly for women to have home-based enterprises, because vast majority of them are engaging in care work as well. So there have been some great things that have changed, and things have changed and improved within the region. But there's always more that we can do as well, and that's probably the area that I would, like to continue working in.
Thanks, Sophie. Paul, do you want to respond to my initial question first, then we can put it together a bit more?
Absolutely, yeah. So we have some fantastic relationships in Ukraine. In fact, I was meant to be out there presenting at another event just in a few days' time. I sadly can't join, but I've been out a few times and been out during the war as well. That said, what we're developing is for refugees from all backgrounds. And to answer the question, what are the challenges? This is not rocket science. This really is not. So let me give you a list. So finding accommodation, one of the biggest challenges. How do you get access to healthcare? If you imagine going into a country where you can barely speak the language, how do you do that? Are they walk-in services at hospitals? How do you do that? How to get a job? One of the most fundamental challenges. Huge challenges, even when you're educated. I mean, I've been working with, part of our matching program and mentoring program. We've had brain surgeons that are working in car washes, right? They don't have the ability to match qualifications and things like that. So the document side of things, qualifications hard. Help with learning a language. One of the most fundamental things you need to succeed in the country. People can't speak the language very well. Straight away, that cuts you off from doing that. Where can you go to learn a language? How can you do that in a way when you don't have much money? Child education. How do you get your kids into school? So that was a major challenge. I've been working with quite a few refugees who just, how does the system work? You walk up to the school gate. What does that look like? There's so many challenges laid on top of that. Add to that things like trauma. People have, had their houses destroyed. Their partners have been killed in the war. They're dealing with extreme trauma. How do you deal with that? So all these issues become compounded. So it's not really a surprise that we find ourselves in a situation where, we've got people with huge potential, but a number of challenges. Our question should be, how can we simply enable them to solve their own challenge? The view of a refugee being someone who is just dependent on the state is an artificial situation. Okay, this could be any of us, right? We're very lucky to live, for the most part, in safe countries where this hasn't happened to us, but any of us could be in this situation. The challenge is, how do we give people that ability to support themselves and give them the information, the support they need to thrive? So everything we do with Beacon, the premise is multi-language. So whatever language you're in, you can access that information. And it really just gives that ability to support yourself and help you to succeed as an individual and access some very good organizations that are out there. And that's really our goal.
Okay, thanks for that, Paul. I'm going to come back to you in a moment, but I've got a question though from somebody called Nazreen Ashkanani. It's a question for you, Sophie. And Nazreen says, in your research on immigrant entrepreneurship, did you explore how locally embedded entrepreneurs perceive or respond to immigrant entrepreneurs, for example, in terms of treatment, competition, or even resentment? And if so, what strategies? How did the immigrant entrepreneurs navigate these dynamics and challenges? Hope that you got all of that. It's quite a big question. Is that something which you've encountered, or some of those issues?
Yeah, and I think it's very context based, I would say. So there was variation even within Jordan. So there were some entrepreneurs that, Jordan is a very small country. There is a lot of poverty and lack of resources. And so when you see 600,000 refugees coming in and you're a population of around 4 million, it's even me as a Syrian, or half Syrian, I can really sympathize with the local people, what a shock this must have been. So of course there was, some resentment there from some people, but they were already struggling. But then there were other women that I talked to who were fantastic. They got into a particular neighborhood or community of local women who showed them the ropes and who help them, develop their business and network them and even invest in some of their businesses. And again, the neighborhood is very important, because the ones who managed to get into maybe more affluent areas were able to get into, maybe perhaps get into richer networks and be able to grow their businesses and get investment. Those who were already extremely poor and ended up in unstructured camps with locals who were also already poor and really lacking in resources, they're the ones that also, did the worst. So it's a very complex situation. It's very much about your background and then where you end up. And some of them were displaced numerous times, even within the country that they arrived to. Of course, in the UK, it was very different. Certainly, it's not the place where all dreams come true. But as soon as they arrived, they were given a home, they were given an NHS number, their children were able to go to school, and they were given English lessons 2 days a week, and local communities were inviting the refugees to cook and give food for free, and over time they supported some of the women to set up cooking in their own kitchens, or providing the community kitchen to cook food and sell it, just as an example. Of course, there are much bigger businesses that have been created from refugees, but this is just kind of giving you an example from the women that I've been engaged with. So I guess in a nutshell, some have been incredibly supportive and some have pushed back, but I always see that the pushback is because people are already struggling.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Sophie. I wonder, before I ask some broader questions which are coming into us now, Paul, are you monitoring the success of this app? I mean, you've told us a little bit about what it does. What's its impact as far as you can discern at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, we have not finished building this, and you were talking about the challenges that's there. One of the most fundamental challenges of things like this is who funds this? Right? Where does this happen? So the way we've tried to do this at BecomingX is working with some of our big corporate partners. Always proud to say, Deloitte has given us a lot of financial support to do this. Wise has also come on board, but there is no kind of government grant to be able to do something like this. So we're having to self-fund this, and it's not cheap building these sorts of solutions. That said, it is a tiny rounding error in the context of what we are spending on the cost of refugees. And this is one of the big challenges that we see at the moment, and we see this in multiple areas. We do a lot of work with prison leavers as well. In the UK and most other countries, seemingly from a government point of view, we are willing, I'm not going to say happy, we are willing to fund dealing with a problem. We will pay for, whether it be hotels accommodation, we will pay benefits and things like that. And there's a lot of political discourse about this, all of the challenges. And of course, people are not happy to do this. And this is causing a lot of resentment in communities. But it's billions of pounds are being spent on dealing with the problem. Next to nothing is being spent on solving the problem. So for a solution like ours, and we've done so much research on this, and the business case for spending what's really a few £1 million, saving hundreds of millions of pounds by enabling people to self-support. Even the most simple economic calculation, if you are able to help someone get a job in 2 weeks quicker than they would have otherwise. Now, in reality, when we've tested this and when we support people, they're getting jobs much more quickly. But even if you take the case of just 2 weeks, it only takes a few people to do that. And this business case has paid for itself already. If you can get people out of accommodation more quickly, if you can get kids into education, if you can help direct people into healthcare and not essentially waste public resources, the business case is enormous. But there is no sum of money in this country. There's no pot of money helping to pay for solutions. And sadly, it's coming on small organizations like mine to say, well, what can we do to help? So that is our fundamental challenge. So right now, we're only 60% of the way through building Beacon. We have piloted this already. So we piloted it with 300 refugees and 300 corporate mentors. It uses AI to match them based on your location and interest, and they support each other. And through that, we got phenomenal feedback from the refugees saying this is really helpful, this is really good, and particularly that human connection of someone being able to help me. My challenge now is, how do we raise the additional capital to be able to do this? And that's a very difficult thing. We are not a charity, we're a social impact company. Because of that, we're automatically ruled out of grants and things like that. So it makes it very challenging, and it's easy in my position to get a little negative about this, because we see millions and millions, in fact billions of pounds going to going to dealing with some of those problems, and actually going to other organizations that provide services but are missing probably the biggest opportunity, which is about equipping people individually, equipping people with that information. So yeah, we're really positive about the future, but it's one of the most challenging things I've ever done in my life, trying to get the money to finish the build of this app.
I've got a question for both of you, which has come from Patricia Lewis, which is, how is the current political context? I think you can talk about the UK because it's in the news every day, but of course it's all over the world. impacting upon your work at the moment, and the kind of the challenges you're facing, and I suppose the campaign work that you're engaged with. Sophie, do you want to have you given direct thought to that in particular?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really interesting. When the refugee crisis, I mean, there's been refugees since time began, but in 2015, when they came to European shores, suddenly it became a problem. And there was so much research funding and interest in looking into this, different global challenges, research funds, ESRC, etc. And then it kind of died down around COVID, but the refugee crisis continued and the numbers increase every year. So that I thought that was quite interesting. I'm obviously very dedicated to the topic and will be for the rest of my career. But so there is that element, and I can't put my finger on exactly why this, whether it was just seen as fashionable at the time, or whether it's just too big now, or whether there's political pressure, particularly in the UK, to stop showing such support, I guess, for this kind of migration. I mean, what's happening today, yesterday, last week, what we can see, what's happening in the protests, what's happening outside hotels, etc., is we're in a very different place from where we were 10 years ago, and that, of course, makes things very challenging. And really polarized people, which is, it makes the research more challenging. I think there was a lot more support for it in the media, and there was a lot more from a humanitarian perspective, and now it's become a political issue, and that's a real shame.
Paul, how are you engaging with this at the moment? I mean, are you talking to British government or governments across Europe? Have you got a kind of a lobbying platform that you're regularly occupying at this moment in time?
I've always found in business it's best to stay out of politics, but I think what we have seen, and Sophie answered that very well, I think it's definitely challenging. In my experience, working with a lot of companies, private individuals, the general view is for refugees, this is where we get definitional, with refugees, people who have now got the right to stay in country, it is pretty obvious that the right thing to do economically, morally, is to help these people, right? We can there's a very simple choice we have as a society. We can either help these people and help them succeed and contribute to the community, or depending on your point of view, not be a drain on the community. I hate seeing these sorts of phrases, but that's how people position it. You can either do that, or we can do nothing. And we'll be continuing to have these conversations for the next few years. So my focus is very much on how do we support these people. Now, of course, there is a different discussion about, is what we are doing encouraging people to come to the UK or encouraging people to go to other places? Now, I want people wherever they are to succeed in whatever environment they're in. Okay, I don't want to get involved in the political discussion and debate, but for people who have the right to be here, I want those people to be able to succeed. I don't want to be doing anything that's encouraging people to take dangerous journeys across the across the channel, or to find themselves in detention, and certainly to lead a life. I mean, we've worked with a lot of asylum seekers. It's a very tough life for the vast majority. It's far harder living on literally a few pounds a week trying to survive in this country. But I just wish we would have many more conversations about how do we generally look for solutions. At the moment, we just talk about the problems, and the solution is how do we support people. It's about self-serving. It's about giving them that support. So yeah, I mean, listen, we're not deliberately knocking on the door of every government. We're actually just getting on with it. In my experience of speaking with many government ministers and things over the years, we're not seeing the solutions coming at pace. This could be done in the next 3 months, right? It's not complicated what I'm talking about doing. Okay, any one of these NGOs, any number of private companies could build what we're doing. We don't have some radically unique skill set at BecomingX that's enabling us to do this. This is an easy problem to solve. It is not being solved because of systems and processes about how money is channeled. I would love to change that. I found a quicker solution is just to do it ourselves. So if we can work with the right people, we've been funding it ourselves. We will continue to do that. And that, in our mind, is a quicker, faster way to get to that solution rather than spending years and years lobbying, because so many organizations have tried to do that and they failed.
Okay, that's very interesting answers. We have a very interesting question about how we might, with this issue, start to possibly reimagine the role of universities and business schools in particular. It's come from Katie Mason. She asks, when we think about immigration, we don't automatically think about going to a business school to learn more about supporting inclusion. How would you suggest we take these ideas and values and integrate them into our business school degree programs? And I think you both probably have a very interesting take on this, both in terms of, what kinds of people do you want to see coming out of a business school? What kinds of attitudes and actions are you going to be interested for them to take? And also, of course, we've got Sophie, who's embedded in a UK university context with all of its trials and tribulations at the moment, speaking out for this issue. Maybe Sophie first, would you like to have a go at answering this question, how perhaps reflecting on your own experience of work in the business school?
I think you've given me a very good starting point, which is we are going through a crisis in the UK higher education sector. Business schools are not immune to that. There's a huge number of redundancies happening across. There's also a lot of standardising and mainstreaming of our programmes that's taking place. Some argue that that's quite regressive, that actually business schools have been, over the last decade, really forward-looking, very inclusive, focusing a lot on sustainability, on social innovation, looking at inclusivity, EDI, climate change becoming at the heart of it, of what we do, linking a lot of our modules and teaching and research to sustainable development goals. But at the same time, we are going through an economic crisis, I guess, or maybe a bigger crisis in the higher education sector, and we're now seem to be shifting into survival mode. And part of that is to really cut back and narrow down what we're doing, trying to make it as generic as possible to bring in as many students from around the world as possible, make it relatable to everyone. Personally, I think that is impacting a bit of the bespokeness in what we were doing as each business school. Like, for example, Lancaster has a fabulous reputation for, LUMS, the management school, has a fabulous reputation for, supporting small business, etc., just because of our location and where we're at. Obviously, other business schools have other great missions as well. I hope that they don't get too compromised by our changes and reactions to what is happening. But at the same time, I'm going to be very honest. I want to keep my job. Need to pay the bills. And I love what I do, and we are incredibly, as much as we mourn as academics, we are so lucky. We really do have the best jobs, I think, in the world, where we are paid to be great thinkers, we go into people's lives, whether qualitatively or quantitatively. We try to make a difference. We try to give voice to the voiceless. We think critically. I hope we don't lose these things because we're responding to a larger crisis.
In my experience, business schools are quite exciting places, though, despite all those challenges. And I've noticed at Kent, a lot of the students are keen to change the world. And that they come in with the kind of spirit that that you've got that I think you've been articulating today, Paul, as well in your work. There is a noticeable concern for engagement, to work out what are the sustainable ways which we might build businesses for the future. Certainly, there's a high commitment to social values alongside whatever you're doing in business, which seems to be carried by the students as they come to us. So I wonder what your perspective is on this role of business schools particularly within promotion of refugee entrepreneurship and these kinds of issues as well. And do you see them as usefully collaborating with you in your kind of work, or do you see them as a bit hamstrung at the moment, given the context in which they also have to work in, as Sophie's just outlined?
Yeah, it's not declare. I've not worked in a business school for about 24 years now. I used to be a research fellow way back when. Listen, I think universities can absolutely help support this situation. Just context, we all know universities are facing a lot of challenges financially. I'm not sure they should necessarily do anything fundamentally different. I think just key principles should look at how we can welcome people from different backgrounds and refugees into university and hopefully make that route accessible. Let's be clear, 6% of refugees get tertiary education. In fact, you look at it, 68% get into primary school, I think it's 37 ended in secondary, only 6% get into tertiary education. 101, I think there's an opportunity there to try and help more refugees get into university. That aside, business schools specifically, and this is a general comment, not specific to refugees, I wish there was a lot more very practical training around entrepreneurship, actually how to run businesses, how to work with people, how to communicate effectively, how to actually be productive in what you do. I'm often asked to come in and teach on the real practicalities of running a business and working with people. I would love to see more of that generally. And these are things that anybody, refugee or not, can take away and help in whatever they choose to do, whether that's setting up their own business or going to work for another company. So I think business schools definitely have a role, but I don't see that as the core challenge that we've got. I think if we can get that right, that's a great opportunity to enhance some people's lives, but I don't think it's going to be the singular solution, if that makes sense.
Okay, thanks for that. I've got a question also from somebody who's interested in, it's a knotty issue, which is concerns, it's from Ranjita Nyoji, who says that she notices that often the professionally qualified refugees with relative language skills get settled into jobs eventually that do not match the level of the skills that they might have nurtured elsewhere. And I suppose it opens up this whole very thorny issue of which sectors are most accommodating for refugee entrepreneurship, and I suppose what my question would be, in the UK at the moment, where do you see the greatest opportunities? But also there must be countless occasions where refugees, in terms of their aspirations and the skills that they've developed elsewhere, just can't find a home very easily in the opportunities within the UK context. Maybe both of you have some views on that. I know with your work in Sweden, Sophie, you've been sort of thinking about how do you open up the opportunities for people and help government understand, if you like, how they might do that better. Maybe Sophie, again, is this something which you've reflected on in particular?
In my research, I haven't, but obviously I'm aware of the situation. My research is very much focused on those probably who have never tried to engage in seeking employment, or did and were very quickly frustrated and turned to entrepreneurship. But I think that if we just look at the UK context, generally, I mean, we have such a high migrant workforce So just look at, if we just use our NHS as an example, you know, we have a huge number of doctors and nurses, etc., that come from outside of the UK or have qualifications from outside the UK. They go through a process of converting, I guess, their qualifications to align with the UK. Just like if a British person was going to America as a nurse, I think you also have to engage in some kind of conversion of your qualifications to suit the local laws and regulations. So that is, so if we could just mirror that for refugees, then I don't believe that a refugee who's coming from Syria or any other country should automatically be a doctor just because they were a doctor. Of course, there should be a form of due diligence that needs to take place, but the really long waiting lists, the really cumbersome process, the extra hurdles that they have to face if they were removed and they were just treated as any migrant who is coming across, then I think that would certainly be more helpful and feel less disheartening, which is probably what I believe this question is alluding to, that people just come and they think, I'm not even going to engage in trying to convert all my certificates, etc. I'll just go and do this or do that. Which is, I have the qualifications to do something more, but I'll just stick to this because I can't go through the heartache and the rejection and the red tape.
Paul, have you given? No doubt you're coming across this all the time.
Yeah, this is 101 for us. This is what we're really trying to do. We help refugees get jobs. That's the core focus. So let me just tell you a quick story. One of our partners, I was on the phone to the global HR lead, okay, and saying, look, we're trying to hire 10,000 refugees globally. There's not many companies that can do this. You'll probably guess who it is. We're trying to hire 10,000 and 5,000 in the UK. And they'd gone to government to say, well, silly question, how do we, where are the refugees? We know there's 330,000 at the moment. How are we going to offer them specifically this opportunity? And the response back was, well, we don't really know. Because in truth, there is no government database of where people live and what qualifications they've got. And so it's really fundamental stuff. And they couldn't do this. And this is actually one of the things we built in Beacon. So through this, we'll have a number of users. We know where they are. We're not tracking them, but we know which city they're in. We know which skills they've got. So we've turned the problem around. Rather than refugees having to search and figure out, well, firstly, who are the companies, who's hiring, what skills, we flipped it around. So companies actually have the opportunity to say, well, look, we've got 50 roles available in a delivery center or in whatever it might be. I'm not going to talk too much about this company. We've got some specific roles that are available and we think you will be suitable. You're in this area, you've got the right skills. We know you can only work flexibly because you might be supporting a child or things like that. And actually, please just click here. And actually, we can take them through a process that enables them to, let's say, have a sympathetic recruitment process where people know they may not have the documentation or the matching qualifications. So this is so fundamental. How can you help give a refugee a job based on the skills that they've got? And it's a really tough challenge, but again, it's one that can be solved. And I think with the right data and the right mentality, and certainly companies that are willing to support people with perhaps more challenging backgrounds, and they do exist. We've worked with some fantastic companies. If you can essentially do something that does that matchmaking, you can make that happen. So there's a great opportunity, and we really hope that we can be at the center of solving that for them.
Okay, we're coming up to the hour. We've got 2 minutes left. I just wondered if I could give you both a minute just to say if people want to sort of engage with you more or with the work you're doing, support you in some way. Perhaps what would you ask from our audience here today? Perhaps Paul, I'll ask you first, given where you're. Where you are in setting all this up, how might people engage with you and learn more or support you more?
Absolutely. So we've got 1,000+ people on this. All of you can do something right now to support a refugee. So we run a mentoring program where we train people to become better leaders, and as part of that, we match them with refugees to get jobs. feel free to get in touch. BecomingX.com, you can find us. If you want to find out more about Beacon and what we're doing, BecomingX.com/beacon. And we're willing to partner with anyone. Where I've openly discussed the challenges. It doesn't take a huge amount. So if you want to, or your organization wants to be part of solving this, please get in touch. We can help do something amazing here.
Thanks very much, Paul. Sophie, what about students, academics who might want to engage more with what you're doing in your work?
I don't want to make it about me or engaging with my work. I think I would rather just give advice. If you are interested in doing research with refugee communities, then it is the most rewarding thing to do in terms of research. It's very fulfilling. Every local council in the UK has got a number of refugees. Of course, these are very heavily protected, but if you contact them and go through the right channels, you may be able to get in touch and support them, and over time build a relationship and conduct some really fascinating and interesting research that would be enriching for you and for our research community as well. And be resilient. You're going to get some pushbacks from particular people in the research community that are looking for more mainstream research on entrepreneurship, but don't lose heart. Just keep going.
Thank you, both Sophie and Paul. Thank you for engaging with such a wide range of topics, and even when they weren't in your comfort zone, I really appreciate all the good food for thought that you provided for us today. Thanks also everybody who's been present and listening to this and contributing questions to it. It's all been very productive. So thank you so much, and hope the rest of the day goes well for you all.
Thank you.
Thanks.